back to the Berg podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And we are continuing to talk about the book. We're talking about Right Away and All at Once. And we're going to focus in a little bit on kind of like the next section of the book, the stay focused section, which is really difficult. If you've ever listened to our podcast, this is a testament to how much we struggle with this one specifically. But stay focused, simple life rules, something of that nature, right? Stay focused, create simple life rules, follow simple life rules.
And the basis of it, right? So the little chart that he gives you and a few other things in that first section of the first section, they seem really simple, right? Like it says, like it goes through that you need to sort of going back to the pruning idea, but he's not on that idea at this point, but that identify what's most important to you in your life, and identify the people that are most important and the things that are most important. And one of the things that he talks about that's really interesting is he talks about how do you make decisions, right? And he says, so sit down just in a group of your friends and say, hey, how do you make decisions, right? And then see what people say. And it's a strange thing because you make so many decisions, but how do you make the decisions? Like, what is the guiding principle? And we've talked about that with our core values, that part of when we did that was to try and establish a guide that would say, hey, here's how you make decisions. You make decisions by looking at our core values and asking if that decision is in line with them. Right. And what he does is similar, right? Of no coincidence, because we had read the book, we were applying these rules at that point. But where it really gets confusing, not confusing, it's not confusing, where it gets difficult is when he talks about the white and the red and the blue chips. And that part is really hit home. Like it really, I can feel the white chips, scenario. Yeah. As I try and operate day to day, personally and professionally.
Yeah, for sure. So you're talking about the reference to the game he played with the young couples, right? He would put the poker chips on the table. Right. White chips at one end, blue chips at the opposite end,
white,
and red chips in the
blue,
middle.
And they're all on one side. So the blue is really far away.
Yeah, the blue is the furthest. And he would say, like, pick up as many chips as you can.
One at a time, no
scooping, in a certain period of time, right? Yep. And very few people would ever make it to the blue chips.
Yeah. And so a sidebar of what's interesting about this, as I get off of blue chips, is we had family over around Christmas at some point, and one of Erin's cousins came up with games the girls could play. And so the game was, she had all these like giant Stay Puft marshmallows, and you had to use the two cups, like two Dixie cups on your hands, like hooves, to pick up marshmallows and put them in a bowl. And whoever got the most marshmallows won. So they developed some teams, not teams, but order that you would go. And so, like Erin,
is that like Hungry Hippos? Is that kind of
it's similar to Hungry Hippos concept? Where you hit it and it grabs, but you're trying to grab it with these cups, which makes it tricky, right? And you weren't allowed to like drag them off the table. They had some rules, and I honestly don't remember how I circumvented the rules. But as the first group went, and they were like, "Ooh, we got 10 in whatever 30 seconds or something," and then Charlotte and Nora and somebody else and a couple of her cousins went. And Charlotte and Nora immediately figured out ways to circumvent they did things that had not been deemed against the rules. So they pushed the limit of what the rules were and got scored a bunch of points and everybody thought it was cute. Mm. And then I went and like wildly, I don't remember how I circumvented. I did not drag them, but whatever I did made it that I could get all of them. And they hadn't really considered it. Like I was taking theirs and I had the most, and then we had a final, and they made it new rules that you couldn't cheat, right? And or couldn't bend the rules. And what sticks in my memory there is that blue chips idea. If you understand what you're trying to achieve, then you can go do that. And that's sort of the point of the white and the red and the blue chips. In the end, he says, like, well, what if I told you that the white chips were only worth 1 point, red was worth, say, 5, and the blue was worth 25, and you had wasted all your time picking up the white chips, right? And that was sort of the relationship there for me with that game is they were trying to figure out the most efficient way to pick up one at a time and put them in. Yeah. Whereas I was like, well, it didn't say you had to pick up one. And I think it was that you didn't have to use the end of the hooves. So if I just put the cups this way, I could sort of squeeze them and I could pick up like 6 at a time. Okay. Because I was using the cups. They didn't say use the end of the cup. So the key that I really take from that is 2 things. One, in our personalities, we need to realize that many times when people give us guidance of what we're supposed to do, we immediately look for the best, quickest way to accomplish what it is, which may not necessarily be the best way or repeatable. It may not be the best process. It might be effective in that moment, but it may not work. But the second piece is, did you even understand what you were trying to accomplish? Did you understand that the chips were worth 25? Because then obviously you would have just walked around the table and grabbed the 25s.
Sure.
And it seems so simple, except much like, how do you make a decision? How do you find out what the blue chips are?
Well, and I think like the harder conversation is like if you haven't established values for things, then you don't know that the blue chips are worth more, right? So I think like in the example he was giving, like without knowing the value, without having personally created the value in your decision-making process, you're just grabbing whatever's in front of you as opposed to prioritizing or using a matrix of sorts to kind of say like, well, those things aren't that important to me. What's important to me has to consume my time as opposed to things that are unimportant. And we've talked about, you've got it on your wall,
yeah,
right in the office,
matrix.
the Eisenhower matrix. We've talked about that dozens of times. And I think it's similar to that. Like for me, I think the hard part is establishing the value, not necessarily like the process of like determining how many chips I want to pick up. It's which chips do I want to pick up? Because the value to me is like, which is the most important thing, not the most urgent thing, not the thing right in front of me, not the thing that arrives at my email or my desk or whatever first, but which is the most important thing. That for me was like one of the hardest, like, kind of like it was like getting smacked in the face with a hammer. Like we've talked about it a lot, but spend so much time like responding to and fighting fires that I feel like sometimes we don't even know if the thing we're trying to save from the fire is worth the time, worth the effort, right? Like sometimes you just let it burn and move on to the important thing.
And so much of it, I don't know, Ford, I don't know how you feel about this, but so much of it for me with the value of the chips is also like what's happened versus what is like going forward, right? Like in other words, like when we try and look back and dissect and do a post-mortem on something, like that is, it can be really valuable. But the question of, is it important or urgent? Well, that's a different question, right? Like in other words, like the blue chip is probably not in most cases, it would not be figuring out what went wrong in the past because you need to go forward. But if I don't know what went wrong, how do I establish the value so I don't make the same mistake again? So that becomes like that balancing struggle as you try and look at the establishing those values. And I feel like it's not as simple as you would think. You know what I mean? I feel like when you make it, he has like the 5 S, whatever. It's faith, family, friends, fitness, finance, right? Mm-hmm. So he has those. And when you do that, I feel like it's simpler, right? Like I feel like in that sense, you could you could establish the faith piece. You could say like which, what is important about my family or whether you're trying to identify people specifically and say like, which family members do I really want in my inner circle that I'm going to focus on as the blue chips and say, these are the people I'm going to focus on, or whether it be what you're doing in your family. Like these pieces of my family life are important. We need to focus on however you're going to do that. Like, I feel like in your life, it is easier, and friends, and you just extrapolate that out. But I feel like in business, it's a little bit trickier because you don't really know the result, you're trying to gauge what's the best to get me to an end, right? Because if you take a job that is a good job and it is profitable and it's good for the team, then that could be a blue chip, but you may not have known it was a blue chip because you weren't sure it was a good job when you took it, and it's the first thing I wrote when I started to try and create the, his market metric, the four columns was in market, or I think it was market was the first one, is we have to only do work that is good work, like the work that we do. Like I want to do this work because we want the job. Like if we could get to a point where we're not winning jobs because we won them, but rather we are selecting which job we would like to do, that's a big difference. And I feel like that allows you to be now you're probably picking blue chips. And if not, you just made a mistake and that's okay. But your intent was you thought it was a blue chip when you picked it, versus just taking whatever chips happen to fall out of the funnel and you just catch those and say, well, this is what we're going to do.
Sure. That's fair.
Well, I was laughing from two parts because there's a lot about this is he's a Mennonite, Christian Mennonite, like that's how he grew up. And so, have a similar background. And I found it very funny. I was like, well, the only way that this game went that way is because people don't know what a casino is. Because,
you
if you think about the chips, like you're like, you wouldn't get, I was like, okay, it's a different metaphor, but it's just funny that like nobody looked at the game. Everybody was so focused on the words that he said that nobody looked at the game and goes, okay, why are some further away than others?
Mm-hmm.
Which would have messed up his analogy. Right. But it's just that you think about that. You're like, well, of course, if there's like 5 at the other end and there's 20 here, right, there's got to be a difference in value and a reason for doing X, Y, and Z.
Right. Yeah.
And
perception wise, like right. I think you were, I think I can speak for all three of us that we would have, had there been less of the blue chips at the far end, I think all three of us would have sprinted to that far end and said, I don't know why there's less down there, but it has to mean something.
Yeah.
So we'd gamble that, there's as good a chance as any. I'll get those and then I'll collect the rest of these extra white ones. And maybe even just that they were further away. Like I would, and I think I would have said like, hey, is there any value difference? Like, does it matter? Are all the chips the same? Like because I like to know the rules.
Sure. Yeah.
In enough
so
way
that stretch them for the marshmallows.
Right. So that I can understand how I want to attempt to bend the rules to benefit us.
Yeah.
What was the second thing?
Well, with that, the unique part is that I think it's a trickle down effect too. I think that there is the white, chips being thrown, dropped, and then it's the picking up pennies and missing dollars or whatever that scenario is, because I think it's the focus piece and I think it's the planning piece that helps really, as you said, going back to making decisions. But if you have that central focus, those decisions get made and they don't like all those other factors that in your life have created why you make that decision, X, Y, and Z for whatever it is. If you have that focus, those decisions are almost made for themselves. You don't really have to make them because all the rest of the parameters are already there and it's just sliding off to the side because you realize that it's not the blue chip versus the white chips.
I was sort of thinking the same thing. So, and I took it maybe a little differently than you did. So you're talking about making your columns. And I might have gone a little more macro when I started to think about it. And I wasn't so much like only take good jobs, but in my mind, I was more like define the work we are willing to do. So, and similar, right? Like you're saying, take good jobs. When I'm saying like, what are the things that make a job good? Like, how do we only do things that we're good at or we can be profitable at, as opposed to like, cause we don't like I think part of the struggle you were starting to describe there is like, how do I know if the job's good or not? Like, you may not know the end result, but in my mind, I was thinking like a little larger. If you started in a spot where you said like, I'm only going to do jobs, and maybe I'll use a reference that we use a lot. Like if I know the work, know the people, and know the place, I'm only going to do those jobs. That's the only type of work I'm going to pursue. Like that doesn't necessarily guarantee it's a good job, but it gives us what we think is probably the highest chance of success. So I think I just looked at it a little bit differently, because I think that the closer you get to the granular, especially from a business perspective, the harder it is to differentiate the grains.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And that's what I should say is what I did was mine got more granular. So I wrote like a very high line thing. And then it got more and more specific to the point where it's that we have to pick, that we have to get to the point where we're not winning jobs. We are selecting jobs. Mm-hmm. But at the very top of it was we have to develop parameters to understand what a successful job is. Yeah. And then make decisions of what we go after based on that. And then I tried to work down to make it more like palpable, that I could describe it to say Dylan or Scott and say, okay, this job is a good job to take because of this. And with probably having nothing to do with the job itself. It's not, you're digging a basement that's a certain size. It's that you're working in an area that that you're working with people that that it's something that we do successfully.
Yeah.
Because you start to think like we shouldn't do jobs that have more than a certain amount of subcontractor money, except in certain scenarios, like a landfill with a liner company, if they own the liner, like all of a sudden, so there's always these except.
Yeah.
But the general principle of it is that we're not a GC, and we're not good at being a GC because we're not a GC. So we should focus on work that's our work and go do our work.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think the interesting thing, he kind of was duplicitous in that, because then he gave the definition of the Generac thing, which, I had remembered.
Yeah.
And they fixed their main thing. But then at the end, they actually created an entirely different
market. Yeah.
So it's not that like, maybe you can use the existing things for something else. I think, it was kind of interesting because he kind of took that second piece there all of a sudden where it was like, oh no, just stick to.
Just do your core competence.
Right. Well, but then he's like, if you need to grow something, there is also the ability to add those extra pieces, to build out what you're trying to do. So it was kind of an interesting thing because if you look at it, he's actually saying both things. Now, how they did it and the process as a setup is the important piece. But it was just interesting because he did say that as well as saying, just stick to the core.
The Generac one was interesting. I agree, because they were an example of somebody who was satisfactorily underperforming, right? And but I thought what was interesting there was they were sort of looking at the market, and the Generac story starts with the large generators, permanent fixtures to power homes and businesses in the event of a large storm or a big power outage or things of that nature, which at the time had been dwindling, right? The number of those events had been going down, which is why they were like kind of just floating. They were just hovering at the right spot. And so what I thought was interesting was that they didn't necessarily change their business model. Like they still had the solution, right? Providing power. They just changed the delivery mechanism from large fixed units to mobile units to provide temporary mobile power, things like that, right? So
they added that because they still did.
Yes, they didn't remove the one.
Right, they didn't change the thing. They actually just did that because his other example of was at Home Depot, and they tried that
the custom interior design.
That didn't.
It didn't work.
It didn't work out, but I think that's the difference. And those are such big macro examples, but on that one, they tried to do something very similar but different, and the other one they did something different but similar. If there is a definition without a difference, but it's a different setup. Like okay, we're just this is close to us, so we're going to try and I think jump into this, and the other way around.
Do you see some similarity there with what we did with snow? Right, that in other words, snow was something similar but different, or is it different but similar? You know what I mean? In that sense, like for me, it was similar but different. It is different in, the hours, that it's unplanned, in that it's a little bit of chaos. That's different. But in principle, the way we wanted to do snow was not a bunch of plow trucks. It was, we take the same machines that we were going to use to do something else, put a different fixture on the front of it. Instead of a bucket, we put, a big box. And then we use the same people doing the same thing, except instead of having to grade the dirt, it just melts.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was always similar, but different. But as we grew, we also had some growing pains there because the team didn't necessarily see it that way, right? The team didn't see it as the same and didn't recall the time when the snow was able to make things possible for our growth, was able to fund our learning curve and our growth. And so it wasn't the same level of engagement, like the same level of buy-in doesn't exist because they don't need it. They're walking in, all the equipment's already here. They don't need to worry about how are we going to buy the next piece, whereas when we were doing it in the first place, that was the means and everybody knew it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that the approach was, let's go do the same thing. Just the venue and the material has changed. Right. So I think that was certainly the thought behind how you guys developed our approach to snow when you were doing it. You figured out what we didn't want to do, right? We didn't want to do
things that start with an H.
Yeah, things that start with an H. Certain types of snow removal in certain places for certain groups of people, but didn't mean that we didn't know how to move bulk material. Bulk. Yeah, right. Exactly. So, yeah, I think that's fair.
But that didn't come out. We were already doing that before we did this process the first time. Like,
right. It wasn't
the result of this.
No. It wasn't the result of this. I didn't mean to suggest that. I just meant that I think that you can see a similarity there with the Generac example. Mm-hmm. But you can also find examples where we did it and it didn't, we thought similar things and it didn't quite work out for us. We weren't able to bolt on other pieces as well as efficiently. Yeah. And then Ford was also able to identify places where there was an opportunity, but the opportunity shouldn't be something with Berg. It wasn't a Berg opportunity, but it was a need. And I think that that diversification, also you can see how intelligent of a move it was in the preparation, in that it didn't tie immediately everything together. It wasn't just one big entity. A lot of times you see people, and that's sort of the point in part of this is that all of a sudden they want it to be this thing that does everything. You know what I mean? Like in the Home Depot example, that it not just sells hardware and wood and tools.
Right.
It also sells high-end furniture and paintings. And there's some relevance there, but in reality, what happened in that example is the people would go see it at this one-stop shop and then buy it from the people they were always going to buy it from, and it didn't help them at all.
Yeah.
And so we had to be careful. Ford was smart enough to not do that he identified that wasn't the way we were going to grow.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that I hadn't read this section of the book when we had our last conversation. Or at least I hadn't read it this time around. And last time we talked a decent amount about the correlation he made to your own personal life. And this section was almost entirely for him about how he applied it to his personal life, not specifically business. Now, he reiterated a number of times how important it is to take the same principles and apply them to finance/business. But I thought it was really interesting, the sort of the what makes you tick has to be a driver for each of us. In regard to maximizing, what you're trying to get out of life, really, right? And we've talked a lot in the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years about work-life balance, right?
I forgot that was in there because that was 10 years ago, and he even he found a better way to explain it.
I know, and I was like, dang, work-life balance. I mean, we've been talking about and I think in a lot of ways we've been talking in similar fashion to what he's describing as work-life integration, where merging the two in a way that doesn't detract from one or the other, right? And I think we do talk about it in those terms a lot, but we've been using those terms like work-life balance or whatever you want to call it a lot in the last couple of years, because it's been so hectic, right? We've been in many ways been sort of stretched to our seemingly physical and mental limitations at times, given the circumstances and the situation.
And you don't make it, the guys, the team listening, I don't want this to be, this isn't job specific. In other words, it's not a couple years, Brian. That's what's kind of scary about it.
Yeah.
It's probably been 8 years, 10 years. I mean, it's because you think about it, you think back to 17, 18, 19, and you're those are the glory days. I mean, we were cruising. We didn't know what we didn't know. We were doing well. We had a lot of work, and guess what we were? Stretched super thin. You know what I mean? We were lean and we were trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But we felt good about it, right? We felt good about it at the time, maybe, but we definitely feel good about it now. Now we look back at it and feel good about it. But the question is, and I'm
funny.
Just making the point that it hasn't been 2 years.
It's funny, the difference in perspective, right? Because I feel the opposite in some ways. I remember those conversations, and the capacity conversation was a really interesting one, even back then, because we went from we from a revenue perspective over the course of 2 years, we increased by 300%. And I remember talking about the growth being violent, not comfortable at all.
Right.
And it's funny that like the difference, like how we describe those things. Cause you're talking about like not knowing what we didn't know and like being in the glory days.
Right. And it was chaos for you.
And it was chaos because of resource management and, working capital and all of those things. But I think it is similar in many ways to like where we're at currently. So we kind of like have, like every business cycle sort of had like its own crests and valleys. And we're again trying to figure out like how to operate within a certain capacity, and not in a bad way. I actually think that like I think it was really healthy. It really taught us, I thought, how to be efficient, because we then, and maybe I'm saying we again, and like it's an incorrect interpretation of how we were looking at it. But at that time, like I remember some of those years, as Ford was kind of encouraging some professional development on my behalf, talking to some folks, and they're like, talking about their support staff groups of being like 7, 8, 9, 10 people in departments. And I was like, I think there's 2 of us, but we figured out I think it was really smart. And then we kind of got into this phase and structure where we're like, oh, well, we're bigger. Well, maybe we need more. And I do think that like, you like when you say it really well at times. You have a saying like hard times make strong men, or something like that. And
hard times make great men. Great men make good times. No, great men make some.
Good times make soft men.
Good times make soft men.
Right.
We should make it not. It could be men or women.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's basically that when things are hard, great people rise to the top.
Yeah.
And when great people rise to the top, great things happen. And great easy times make for soft people.
Yeah.
And soft people make for hard times again. And so it's just cyclical. That's the way it's going to go.
Yeah. So I just thought it was interesting. And one of the things I was thinking of as I was reading this chapter was like how would it have been different from a personal or family or a life perspective if we had sort of taken like this chapter? Like I feel like we did a really good job in the moment of saying, from a business perspective, here's what we've been tasked with. Here's what we want to do over these next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And like you are really good at, like, we ran at the target like a bull running at a flag, and
that's sort of a compliment for it.
It is. No, it's 100%. I if it didn't come off that way, I apologize.
No, it does. It's also its own. It's like anything else. It's its own flaw.
Yeah. Well, it can be, and
there could be a cliff right behind.
And we
flag.
both like, yeah.
But I'm sorry, I interrupted.
And it stretched us and it challenges us, and it's really good. But I didn't necessarily going back and reflecting on this specific chapter. I never was like recalled that it was about like the personal side at all.
The personal side to me, like I just must have glazed over that because we were reading it for the business perspective.
100%.
And now I'm like, at a different spot in life with the kids and stuff. And I'm like, and especially when it jumped to this chapter, because this very first chapter, as you said, was 90% about the personal go forward plan. It wasn't about the business plan.
Yeah.
But when I read it, the Generac stories are the different things that I remember or the plan. All I remember, I think because we were looking, the reason we were reading it was for like that piece. I think we just I don't know. I just glazed over that entire section and never even really tied it together.
It's really funny that you say that because I feel that way, but I felt like you two did a good job of doing it. Mm. And maybe I did not. You know what I mean? Like I felt like that I doubled down on that this was the blue chip, right? That there was one blue chip. This was it. It was crucial that I get this blue chip. And if I do, everything else will be fine, which is 100% the opposite of what the book says as I reread that chapter. But I felt like Ford and you, I mean, I normally feel like you are so intentional that nothing happens by accident. Mm. So I feel like Brian is Brian is going to these camps or these games, or he's coaching this team because Brian has thought about it and decided this is the best course of action. This is the blue chip.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So looking back, I thought that you had done it. And then Ford, I certainly thought, had stepped back and say, okay, I can't just continue to chase this thing. Like, I want other things, you know what I mean? Because in this window, Ford has kids, Ford, you know what I mean? Like all these things that Ford does, you know what I mean? And so it's ironic because I looked at it like you guys may have actually caught it and you're saying you didn't. It just, you know, life happened, which is what the book says, that life just happened.
Sure.
And it went where it went and we made the best of it. But that means that all three of us read that chapter and glazed right over it like, yep, got it. Yeah. This is what we got to do for business.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even talking about business. It was.
Right.
It was. But it was focused on sort of, you got to have your house in order. If you're going to have everything else in order, you should get your house in order. Because
do either of you, like Ford, I know you've talked about it. One of the things he talked about kind of at length in the middle of the chapter was like how much he relied on like a closely held group of friends or family or people that to like to relate to talk through what's happening, and not specifically just business, but like all of those things, the faith, the family, the friends, the fitness, all of those things. And I feel like you talk about it. Well, you're not super public about it, but I feel like in our private conversations away from microphones, you've talked about how you've been able to like sort of keep those relationships that you have picked up throughout life. And it feels to me, at least from the outside looking in, like that's valuable to you and you keep it important.
It's valuable. It's funny, as I read it though, I was like, oh, I got to do some better work on that too. Just because like, you know, I'm in the phase of life where, you know, with the small children where you just, you know, you get into bed every day, you don't do that. But, you know, still having a couple of breakfasts with some people, still doing that kind of stuff that you can kind of get out of there. You know, it's interesting. He's got that group of 4 or whatever he does that he kind of, you know, checks in with every week. I don't have anything to that level. It would be interesting. At the same time, that's a lot of words. I think I'd run out before we had a weekly meeting on something. But, you know, I do think that is something where, like, you know, the situation we talked about at the last, like the situational, you have people coming in and out of your life and keeping a close crew to be able to. But the reality is, I mean, we all talk about it. Like, there's a lot of people in our lives, but there's very few. That's where sometimes the peer groups and stuff, because they are going through the exact same things they've seen or experiencing it, really has some benefit because, you know, there's still a fair amount of things that a lot of people don't need to be burdened with. That's not their problem. Or, you know, I'm not unloading on somebody when I had something go challenging or in a day. So that is where like the peer group is beneficial. Or I was thinking about, like, I know we did a couple of things here in the last year or two where like you guys are able to bring your spouses along, you know, and I always laugh about those things because I remember when Tamara was working and I got to be the brought along spouse.
The +1.
I never felt like I got closer to her because I was part of whatever that work event was, right? Like I didn't go into it looking for that. Maybe, you know, I wasn't really involved. I was just kind of there as, you know, the +1. Yeah.
He was
the eye candy.
He was the young Jason Kelsey.
Yeah, exactly. So I never like tied that together, but it's interesting. He said that one thing about where he takes his wife now to this event.
Yeah.
And it actually, but I think she's like, he was running it, so he was able to involve her more.
Yeah.
But some of those type of factors where, like, you know, we all know our spouses, they do or don't like those things. They like to have a person they like to be there with just because it's not like their
group.
Or maybe maybe it's more on me and us that we didn't really, you know, I think I'll take the heat myself. Like, I didn't really involve them. They were there, but it wasn't like they were really, you know, connected in. It was more like, all right, I'm going to stand here and, you know, have these like meats and cheeses and, you know, check my watch every 20 minutes and see how long I have to sit here till I can leave the event.
And that's the time in. Like, because that speaks to you. You know what I mean? Like, and not in an insulting way. I mean, it genuinely, like when Ford goes to, even recently we went to an event and it's Ford is a big proponent of Good Samaritan. And we went and at one point Aaron was like, where's Ford? And I was like, he's going to be in a corner somewhere, just standing in the shadows. He doesn't, you know, he's supposed to be here. So he's here. and not that he doesn't enjoy going, but he doesn't want to be the center of attention, and he never does. And so it's hard to make people feel engaged when you don't really want to engage that way. So it's hard to have then your spouse feel engaged because, you know, in that world, though, actually Tamara goes out and
she is the one.
She's your bidder.
Engaged,
you know, but what I don't want to do in going over this section of the book is lose that importance of family and the piece of what it does. Because you bring up a really interesting point, which is like, I just don't do it to the point where the girls now say like, and I feel like it's a podcast and I say it and it makes me even worse, but like, I don't attempt to make friends. I can make friends, and I say like, I have acquaintances, but friends, that's far fewer, you know, because I don't, it sounds terrible to say I don't have time, but in that, like family was first, like, or second, you know what I mean? Like, it was like faith and family. Like, so I don't believe I have enough space for much beyond family. You know what I mean? Like when I look at it, I'm like in that integration, I can only allow for so much. And the friends that I have are, it's just, I'm like, as a person, I feel like I am so like Machiavellian in how I operate at the end so that's an old Italian philosopher book that the ends justify the means, basically. Right, so as long as it ends in something positive and you get what you want, then it doesn't matter how you got it, right? Which, as you really explained, it doesn't sound great, but you have to know yourself, and that's a lot of how I operate.
What was the guy? The Bain Capital guy?
Yeah.
I read that and I had to laugh about him saying about like in every conversation you either win space or lose space. And I was like,
I highlighted that and wrote it down because that's.
I just wrote that. I was like laughing. I'm like, all right, I know someone's going to take a highlighter to this.
Yeah, I mean that's it. Like that is how I operate in any interaction. I'm trying. There's gain or loss. You either won or you lost, and
what if you don't play the game?
You could still lose for it. If you don't play the game, you may lose. You may win or lose.
No decision is a decision, buddy.
No decision is a decision. And it's funny because Ford, I'm not like a big martial arts guy, right? And I can't believe I don't know what I read that would trigger me to think about this. But one of them, is it jiu-jitsu, or one of them is a very like defensive thing. You don't actually attack at all.
Jiu-jitsu,
it's jiu-jitsu.
I'm pretty
right. So and if I'm wrong, people can tell me I'm wrong. It doesn't matter. But one of the martial arts thing is very defensive, and so you would say I'm not doing anything, but you are doing something.
Yeah.
Your entire means is that. So to that, what if you don't make a decision? Ford always makes decisions.
Yeah.
But he may not be he may not be coming at you. But that doesn't mean you're not going to lose. It just means he's not running at you. He's letting you come to him, and then it's going to go the way it's going to go. And you may have even think you won, but you may not have understood what the blue chips were. You might be holding 42 white chips, and he's got the two blue ones, and you just lost. You know what I mean? And so that's his means. So I think you do operate with there is gain or loss in any interaction, and you just evaluate it. I think I do it more violently, more aggressively than Ford does it. But I think that, you know, what I was trying to get to was like the friends that I have are associated with places I want to be. I realized, like, as I read the chapter, I realized how much I do that I want to have certain friends at work because I'm going to spend a lot of time at work. So I take time to engage and involve with certain people more. And it doesn't mean I don't interact with others. I interact and it feels fine, but I have a closer relationship with a certain few people because those people, I feel like I can devote that time that's necessary to be a friend to them. Yeah. And the same thing, you know, like Ocean City. I have certain people that I am friends with in Ocean City. I have certain, you know, and I do that in most of the interactions I realize, but I don't make an effort to the place for me is the trigger, I guess is what I started to realize. Like I have to be in that place with the exception, truthfully, there's the exception of only a couple people. There's a couple people that I would talk to regardless of which one of the places I was if something happened, because they're that central to me in terms of friends. And I guess when you go through this exercise that he wants to, that's the realization you'd come to is of all these people you interact with, there's 4 people that you value or 5 people that you value to that level that they're the people. And that's the blue chips, right? In the friends section.
Sure.
Yeah. You know, I mean, do you sort of feel that way? Because I feel like I feel like you both have a lot of friends. Like everywhere we go, people know Ford. But that doesn't make them your friend. It just makes them know Ford.
Yeah.
You know?
Known associates.
Just acquaintances, as I like to say.
Well, as many acquaintances, you know, you do a lot of civic-based stuff in your community it's only 10 miles up the road, but it's still a different community.
It's a different community.
There's an invisible wall. Yeah.
There's an invisible wall.
The buggy takes a little while to get here.
And as we've known each other for so long, like I remember your quasi group of friends, the people that I saw you hanging out with when we were in high school, right?
Yeah.
Like the Unster boys or the groups from that church or whatever.
Yeah,
Like we played when we played hockey, and don't know if like you probably see him socially, but like how that actually ties to the thing. And it's the interesting thing, I think we talked about this years ago. The wheel, right? And like there was that one lady and I just completely argued with her because I didn't believe in the wheel. It's supposed to be like well-rounded, right? As far as like, and maybe that's the part, like, maybe that's why this 5Fs is because it's like, okay, if you just focus 100% on family, nobody can really fault you for that.
Sure.
But then at some point, your family changes, kids grow up or whatever happens. And then you get to a point and you're like, all right, I spent 98% focusing on this. That's no longer there. What fell off during that time because of my intense focus on a particular, any one of the 5, right? So I think that's the interesting thing is like, he's kind of spreading it, not real wide. It's only 5, but he's kind of spreading it a little bit so that there's a little bit of a, you don't get to the end and there's only one thing that was really the central point to it.
Yeah.
I think there was one thing in there he read about where, didn't he say that he went to the one thing and like his wife saw, like she was happy he was going to that event because he actually came back as a better X, Y, and Z, which is interesting because there's a lot of things that I like to go do. I must not return in a better shape because I'm not encouraged to do those events.
You don't come back a better person.
I don't know if that or just there isn't the notice there, but I definitely don't get the like, you should really keep doing this every weekend.
He did say that though. He said like there was a time kind of in his life, he would go to these events and he'd go run meetings and then he'd come home and his wife would be like, why didn't you take us? Or, and he said like, now he's found a way to make the family piece part of the importance. And now she is like encouraged by his time spent with other people, friends, and like closely held other groups. So because like each one of them has its place for importance, I think is part of the key, right?
Balancing act.
Yeah.
You know what's really funny that comes to mind with the fitness one is weird, right? I mean,
it's funny because I thought about this, the couple years later when you guys did that fitness challenge that we talk about a lot, that wasn't tied. Like we never tied that back to this at all. That was you guys just doing not a one-off thing, but you're doing something completely separate, just trying to
each of us deciding we were in very poor health and should do something about it.
Brian decided he would like to beat me at anything.
I didn't necessarily want to beat you. I just didn't want you to win.
Well, it was up to you to beat me.
Sounds like that. Sounds like that story that you were telling about that my dad told you the other day. But no, it was interesting because I was like, I think the interesting part is over this time, whether we soak this in the first time, I think we're soaking it in different. Just it's only been 2 episodes, and we're soaking it in differently. But we did a bunch of the stuff. I think it goes back to like for a while ago with our safety. We said, are we being safe because we're being safe, or are we safe because And this is a similar thing. Like you wonder about how much of that stuff that we did after we did this the first time that
almost
could be attributed to it.
Was it influenced?
Again, back to making decisions. Like, was there some of this stuff that like we didn't attribute it to the appropriate place, but there was actually something that was seeded into that particular perspective.
Yeah, and with the fitness piece, right? The thing that just became really weird to me as I read it is like, I work out, you work out, right? And you work out. But I didn't make it that, right? Like, I mean, we can work out 3-4 whatever times a week and you feel better. Like I agree, but I started to associate it with something completely different, which in skiing right now it's winter. So I go skiing, but for me it's surfing. And I realized that it ties together a few of those things. Like I think Aaron is happier on days when I've been surfing. Like even if there was no waves, a day that there's no waves, cause it happens, right? But like we go to the beach, so we're in like this place that we like, right? Like it's calming. And then I take the girls. So now I got family and my friends are there, like people, my acquaintances, friends that I see down there. And you just paddle out and just catch a couple waves and come back in, like, I think I'm a better person when I come back in just because of like the 5 F's. Like, as crazy as that might be, it's, you just took, you know, because there is, especially out here, it would be like sacrilegious, but there is like a faith piece to this. There is something so like calming. Like, I think of Tori with the yoga, something so calming about just sitting on a surfboard, not right close to shore. I mean, you get 100 yards offshore, and where the waves and your board's just floating over, and there's birds flying by, and it's quiet, and there's something like calming, like, you know, quasi-religious about it, that you're like sitting quietly in church, and then you have your family and you have your friends, and it is fitness, you know. And I come back in and I think I might be a better person at the end of the day. And all of a sudden I started to think about skiing, and I was like, I think there's a similarity there too, that like when I'm done skiing, when I've like gone out with the people, because I don't want to ski by myself. I'll do it, but it's not what I want to do.
Sure.
When I get to go out and ski and be active with the people I want to be with, I come back a better person. You know, like it has some impact on me greater than just making myself tired from going up and down, whatever. And I started to really apply that. Like, it's interesting. I would have never, without the book, I don't think I ever would have really made that association. I would just say that I had fun. Right. But what if it's more than fun?
Well, it's also, you know, like what family, you know, which nucleus you calling it. But I was thinking about, there's a gentleman that left our team for a little while, then he came back. But his last day, they all went to the restaurant together just to say goodbye to him. And it was neat to see that the friends that he had made, you know, he worked with a lot of people while he was here. But then there was 10 to 15 people that stopped by to have a drink and say goodbye to him. Now he's back on the team, so that it's a good thing. But it was just kind of interesting to like see that group. It just happened I wasn't invited to the event, but I was actually walking down the street and saw them, so I stopped in to say hello to everybody. But it was just one of those events where, like, you know, you saw that group of people actually kind of
another nucleus,
a different nucleus of what the family is or whatever. You know, like, you know, we talk about, we had that that thing last year where the people came in and interviewed some of the team members, and like, you know, family came up a lot or whatever the scenario is, and like that's something you can't, whatever family they're determining that to be, that's not something that can be faked very easily. That is what it is, or it's not. Like, you can't really, a fake one of those doesn't really work too well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's probably a fair place to wrap it up. I feel like this is one of those topics that we could really like spend some time on if we wanted to.
I think it'll be the theme through the book, where I will kind of have that situation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think like a lot of reflection about like having read it already, but maybe pulling different stuff out of it this time for sure. So, well, thanks folks for joining us. We hope you got something from this, and we hope you come back for another episode.